Okay, picture this. It's December 1st, 1948. You're walking along Somerton Beach in Adelaide, South Australia, and you stumble upon one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century.
A man just lying there by the seawall. He's perfectly dressed in a suit and tie.
Perfectly dressed, but with every single label cut out of his clothing, no wallet, no ID, just nothing, no clue who he was.
It was the perfect disappearance. A man who seemingly just willed himself out of existence. And for decades, the whole mystery hinged on this one tiny clue.
The famous one?
The famous one. A tiny, tightly rolled slip of paper they found in a hidden fob pocket.
Yep.
And on it were the words, Tamam Shud.
Which means it is finished. It was torn from a very rare edition of Omar Khayyam's The Rubaiyat, and for what, 74 years, that was it? Investigators were just chasing shadows, theories from Cold War spy stories to, a tragic love affair.
Until 2022, everything changed.
Right, using forensic genealogy, DNA, the Somerton man finally got his name back. He was Carl Webb.
And this is where the story gets really bizarre. You would think, okay, we have the name, case closed.
Yeah, problem solved.
But the sources we've looked at show that identifying Carl Webb didn't bring closure at all. It was more like the starting gun for two entirely new mysteries. It was like a key that just unlocked a door to an even deeper vault of secrets.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We know who the Somerton man was, but that knowledge has just blown the mystery wide open again. So now we're following two very dark and tangled trails.
Where was Carl Webb during his last missing year? And what happened to his ex-wife, Dorothy Jean Robertson? Because it looks like she was systematically erased from history.
This is where the story truly begins. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's so fascinating is how close he was to being a completely traceable person. I mean, before he became this ghost on a beach, he was just Carl Webb from Melbourne, a skilled electrical fitter.
An instrument maker.
Exactly. The records show he worked for a place called the Red Point Tool Company, making things like power screwdrivers, drills, precision stuff.
So he had roots, a trade, a life. But that documented life just stops. And it seems to be completely tied to the breakdown of his marriage.
100%. His ex-wife, Dorothy, is really our key witness to his last known movements. She filed for divorce in 1951.
And the grounds were desertion for a period of 3 years and upwards.
Which is an important legal point. She didn't have to prove he was cruel or had an affair, just that he'd been gone, that he'd abandoned her for a specific length of time.
And the sources give us this really narrow window where Webb just evaporates. Dorothy said she hadn't seen him since September 1946 when she left their flat.
Right, and she believed he officially moved out in April of 1947. That time frame is so critical.
Why that month specifically?
Because we know a summons for a maintenance order was served on him at his job at Red Point Tool Company in that exact month.
Yeah.
April 1947.
So he's definitely there at work in April 47.
We have him pinned down. Then the maintenance payments he was ordered to make, they stopped just 2 months later in June 1947. His mother dies in November 1947. The paper trail goes completely cold.
So wait a minute. He's a registered tradesman living in a major Australian city, and the investigation just hits a total black hole for almost exactly 1 year, from late 1947 to late November 1948 when he shows up in Adelaide.
That's the really shocking part of the identification. A man who was part of the system just stepped out of it. And you have to remember, in 1947, it was much harder to vanish than it is today.
Sure, no digital trail, but still.
Still, cutting all ties, even with your family, that took enormous effort. By the time the police were asking questions in the early 50s, his own sister hadn't seen him in years.
Which brings up the biggest question of all. If he completely broke from his life in Victoria, why Adelaide? Why travel all that way to a different state just to die on a beach?
And that brings us right to the geographical puzzle. The one involving his ex-wife, Dorothy Jean Robertson.
Because while they lived together in Victoria, the divorce papers revealed something really unexpected about her location.
They did. By the mid-1950s, she was living in Butte, South Australia.
Butte? That's a small town, maybe. What, 90 miles northeast of Adelaide?
About that, yeah. So given that Carl Webb had no other connections to Adelaide, the simplest explanation is that he came to South Australia looking for her.
It's the most logical theory, but we have to be clear, it is still speculation.
It is, but it's a strong working theory.
No.
And it forces you to look much closer at their relationship. The problem is, we only really have one side of that story.
Dorothy's side.
Right, from her divorce affidavit. She cited habitual cruelty. She mentioned explosive anger, verbal abuse. She even recalled him calling her a liar.
It paints a pretty clear picture of a toxic relationship, but the expert analysis of those legal documents, that's where things get complicated.
Very complicated. Because you have to remember, Carl Webb was already dead. He couldn't defend himself, and researchers point to what's missing from her account.
The context.
The context is everything. Carl Webb had suffered this string of incredible personal tragedies. His father died in 1939. Then his brother and his nephew both died in 1943.
Wow.
And on top of that, his mother was very ill, and then she passed away in November 1947. These are huge successive losses. They would have absolutely affected his emotional state, his behavior.
So if he was struggling with all that grief, that trauma, it might explain some of the outbursts she described, but none of that is in her affidavit.
Not a word. And some researchers suggest this was a very deliberate omission. Dorothy needed that divorce. The cleanest, quickest way to get it was to paint him as a cruel man who just deserted her.
And any mitigating context, like him dealing with immense family loss, might have complicated that narrative for the judge.
It could have. So it seems a very specific, one-sided story was presented to the court.
So the Somerton man, Carl Webb, becomes this person dealing with profound, unresolved loss. But his public story is shaped entirely by the legal needs of an ex-wife who just wanted out.
Yeah.
It definitely makes him a more complex figure than just a cruel husband.
But the rabbit hole doesn't stop there. This is the moment where the entire mystery just flips on its head.
Right. Carl Webb vanishes for good in 1948. But then it seems his ex-wife, Dorothy, vanishes just a few years later.
Or was made to vanish. We know she stayed in South Australia. She remarried in 1952 to a man named Geoffrey Arthur Lockyer.
That marriage also fell apart pretty quickly. Divorce proceedings started in 1955, and we know she had an appendectomy around then, so she's definitely there in South Australia in the mid-50s.
And this is where you have to focus on her second husband, Geoffrey Lockyer, and this extremely strange legal action he took in November 1955.
This is a wild detail.
It's unbelievable. While their divorce was pending, he made a very specific, highly unusual request to the court. He asked to prevent the divorce action from abating by reason of the death of the above-named defendant.
Okay, let's just pause on that, because it sounds like dry legal language, but it's explosive.
It is. Back then, divorce was a personal action. If one of the parties died before the final decree was issued, the whole case just ended. It abated. The court lost its power to act.
So for Lockyer to file that motion,
it's a massive red flag. He's basically telling the judge, I have reason to believe my wife may have just died, but I still want this divorce finalized. He had knowledge of an irregular and potentially terminal event concerning Dorothy.
that is just astonishing to put in a court document. He believes she's dead or dying in November 1955. And then you combine that with the other huge piece of missing evidence.
The death certificate.
There is no formal death certificate for Dorothy Jean Robertson anywhere.
Which, if you want that single aha moment, this is it. In mid-1950s Australia, death registration was mandatory. It was systematic. For a person who is in the system, having surgery, going through a divorce, for their death record to just not exist, that's not a clerical error.
So when you put it all together, no death record, no burial or cremation details, which is really unusual for the daughter of a decorated WWI veteran like her father was, it starts to look intentional.
Precisely. You move past coincidence and into active concealment. The complete and total lack of these expected records, it actually has what they call probative value. The absence of evidence becomes the evidence.
It makes a deliberate cover-up, a deliberate erasure of her, seem far more plausible.
And what's the most compelling reason to go to all that trouble? It's almost certainly the infamous connection to the Somerton man and the scandal that would have consumed her family if her death, especially a suspicious one, became public knowledge.
So let's circle back to Carl Webb. We have to reinterpret his final act now that we understand the lengths people went to get away from his story. He was a skilled tradesman, but his death on that beach feels like something else entirely. It feels theatrical.
That's a really important word for it. The prevailing theory now is that Webb, just burdened by all that grief and loss, chose to frame his own suicide as a kind of deliberate performance.
And the sources point to a potential reason why.
Yeah, his family, particularly on his father's side, had these really strong, long-standing ties to the famous J.C. Williamson Theater Company. He may have grown up around that world, with a flair for the dramatic.
That connection adds so much weight to the staging of his death. The removed labels, the careful posture, the clean body, and of course, the code.
The code found in the Rubaiyat book. It's now being theorized that it wasn't a spy code, but maybe a kind of death poem or a map for his final performance. He wasn't just ending his life. He was turning a tragic ending into an eternal, cryptic piece of art.
He ensured he wouldn't be forgotten, but that he'd be remembered as a puzzle.
Exactly. And speaking of puzzles, what about the poison? The original investigation looks hard at something called ouabain, or strophanthin.
An African arrow poison, which sounds incredibly exotic for an electrical fitter from Melbourne. How does that even connect?
It's one of the tougher links to prove, but some researchers have connected the letters in the Tamam Shud code to ciphers used in naval activity and even some African geographical names.
So it's possible he had some hidden life during that missing year.
It's possible. Or maybe his family connections introduced him to people who traveled, maybe related to the war. It's speculative, but it's a thread.
What stands out to me is this dual legacy. Carl Webb creates this mystery with his death, and then his death may have forced the disappearance of Dorothy. And that puts modern authorities in a really tough spot.
It really does. They're facing this complex legal and ethical bind. You have massive public interest in a 76-year-old cold case on one side.
And on the other, a legal duty to protect the privacy of any surviving family members.
Exactly. The Robertson family may have spent decades making sure Dorothy's name and her link to this whole scandal just never surfaced. And now, finding Carl Webb's identity threatens to undo all of that careful silence.
It's a choice between historical truth and, protecting a family from the notoriety of a suicide that became Australia's greatest mystery. So we solved the who, but in doing so, we've basically doubled the size of the mystery. We now have these two huge tangled questions: the why of Carl Webb's trip to Adelaide, and the successful systematic erasure of his ex-wife, Dorothy.
And the most powerful new evidence is all that missing information about Dorothy. I mean, think about this last detail. As late as 1989, decades after her second husband believed she was dead, Dorothy's own sister, Phyllis, listed her as alive on their father's death certificate.
Even though her father, John Comer Robertson, had explicitly cut Dorothy out of his will.
Correct. The will shows a clear break, a deliberate cutting off, but the sister keeps up the public fiction that she's alive. It just screams of a conscious, family-wide, decades-long silence.
A strategy.
A strategy to protect the family honor from the glare of the Somerton Man case.
Carl Webb's complicated, sad life and his poetic death have pulled us all into a mystery that just keeps evolving. It makes his passing a kind of long-living poetry, as one researcher put it. The identity is known, but the plot is still unfolding, linking back to his wife, her family, and the silence they built around her. So given the two major unsolved disappearances, Webb's missing year and Dorothy's missing death, what unanswered question will you follow up on next?